Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today for AtScale's 2019.2 release, the Customer Update. Next slide, please, Matt. Joining the call with me today, this is Scott Hauser speaking. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AtScale. And on the call with me this afternoon are three of my colleagues, Matthew Baird, one of the co-founders and CTO, Darren Drummond, an early employee and the Director of Products, and Patrick Toole, also Director of Products. We felt like it was important to start to broaden your access to the products team at AtScale. As our technology continues to mature and our product portfolio continues to expand, we want to make sure that you as our customers have broader access to those folks who are driving the direction, the roadmap, and the strategy of the products that we bring to market. So on the call today, Matthew's going to walk us through some details around the release, and he'll talk about and actually demonstrate some of the new features and functionality we've shipped in 2019.2. Darren's going to run a Q&A section later on in the call, and Patrick will also provide some feedback and thoughts around more data platform strategy, where he's focused on a day-to-day basis. As many of you are probably aware, we shifted to a quarterly release cycle at the end of fiscal 2018, and this is the second release in that quarterly cycle. We will also continue to do these calls on a quarterly basis, so look for them in your inbox over the next couple of weeks for the next one to come. Next slide, please, Matt. So a couple of the areas we want to talk about today is really about the product philosophy and the priorities as we approach each one of these quarterly releases. And many of you have heard from Matt and I in our travels more recently. We've been out doing a number of customer visits to get feedback on the product, the technology, the market, the ecosystem, and we're leveraging that feedback and thought to drive our strategy moving forward. To that end, there are three key attributes we think about when doing any product prioritization or planning. That's performance, security, and agility. And with respect to performance, if many of you who've used our technology for several years, you've seen what we were able to do by bringing BI and interactive analytics to the Hadoop ecosystem. And obviously that's where we began our journey, but it was never going to be the end. And so as we progressed to support a lot of the emerging cloud data warehouses and more traditional data platforms, which we'll talk about today, right, we've tried to expand the capabilities for scale, concurrency, and overall query performance in and around the analytics ecosystem. In addition to that, we focused a lot on autonomous data engineering, which Matt will talk about in just a little while, where we see incredible increases in the evolving world of the cloud data warehouse, where time to query performance is critically important. Optimizations that can alleviate additional cost or friction are important, and really simplifying what the analysts have to do to optimize query analytical performance. Making all of that automated is critically important to the core value of AtScale, and Matt's going to talk a lot more about that shortly. As with everything else, security is paramount. And as these environments become more and more distributed, AtScale provides the ability to plug into and leverage the data platform's authorization and authentication mechanisms, but we've also extended that quite a bit with what we like to call perspectives. But over time, you'll see a lot more from us there, just based upon where we live in the query path. There's a lot of opportunity that we can discuss a little bit later on. And lastly is agility. And thinking about the concepts of virtualization, in the very first version of AtScale, we introduced virtualization where you could create a virtual cube, whereas the physical structure of the data and how it was materialized on disk or in a database didn't necessarily have to align with how you wanted to present it to the overall applications. And we're extending that concept later this fall, where you'll see AtScale begin to do much broader virtualization. And some of you have seen the demos where we show AtScale performing in multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and on-prem and cloud environments where that singular virtual cube can transcend physical data platforms. So these are the key areas where we invest a lot of resource and time as we continue to evolve AtScale to the currently shipping version of 2019.2. Next slide, please, Matt. So with respect to performance, we've added a lot of data platform capabilities over the last 12 months, but the latest in that additional support is Teradata, Postgres, and Oracle. We consider these to be limited availability, and they do require a license key to unlock. So if you're interested in leveraging these features, please reach out to your account team. Could be your CSM, your account rep, or the solutions engineer who's tied to your account. We're calling these limited availability because these initial implementations do not include true delegation or HLL++. So in this first deployment, you'll use a broader user ID and password or an admin type account to gain access to the data, but that will change in subsequent releases. Excuse me. In addition to these three platforms being a part of the 2019.2 release, we're also certifying CDH 6.1 support. And so as you can see, we continue to support the Hadoop ecosystem, and we will continue to do so, but we've broadened our approach to the major cloud databases, so we support things like Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, and the like. So as you can see that portfolio continue to evolve, our vision and goal is that as data platforms continue to come to market, AtScale will accelerate how we go about certifying those and giving them access to our customers. And perhaps now's a good time, Ed, if you want to talk a bit about some of the work we've been doing to accelerate how we qualify data platforms and some of the advances that were made in an earlier release to simplify that process for our development and possibly others.
Sure thing. Thanks, Scott. This is Matthew Baird. What Scott's talking about is our commitment to supporting more platforms at a deep level and not just dialectic translation is being augmented with the building of an entirely new engineering team solely focused on building out platform support. And this team is going to be empowered by the new SDK that we released in the prior release, 2019.1, which makes it more structured, and there's a contractual interface for building out platform support for new data warehouses. We understand the value of it, and strategically from our perspective, as we get into virtualization more and more, we're going to get into more mixed environments. We're hearing it from the customers. Can you support KDB? Can you support Teradata? Can you support X, Y, and Z? And we need to be able to react quickly to that. So we're making a large financial commitment as a company manifested in both engineering and technology that'll accelerate that.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. And one more housekeeping item to note. I apologize for not saying this earlier, but throughout the presentation today, if you want to click on the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen and submit questions, we will go through those at the end of the webinar. So apologies for not highlighting that earlier, but that is at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to log questions there for us to review at the end. Additionally, around performance, we focused on autonomous data engineering. And the first, many of you are familiar with the adaptive cache, and ultimately we will brand that because what we really provide is not a cache, and Matt's going to talk about that in just a moment. But this concept of in-memory dimensions was a step beyond what we had originally provided, and that as we've seen customers who have significantly large dimensions, the ability to pin those into memory has shown orders of magnitude performance improvements. And so in some larger circumstances or more heavily concurrent circumstances, this is a great feature. Again, it's one that we are considering it to be limited availability, and it is hidden behind a a key. So you will need to work with your account team, who can provide you with additional documentation and insight into how the feature works. But ultimately, this is one that we'd love to get more feedback from customers in the wild, and we can leverage that feedback to continue to evolve that feature and expose that more broadly in the user experience. But while we're on the topic, Matt, do you want to dive into and just describe the importance of autonomous data engineering and sort of how we think about that and why we're investing so much in it?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, a cache can accelerate query patterns that it's seen before. And our approach in the technology that we are currently calling the adaptive cache is not a traditional cache. It functions in that it accelerates performance like a cache will, but it's able to accelerate query patterns that it's never seen before. And it operates with more strategies, I'll call them, than a cache has. For the autonomous data engineering piece, we've modeled how a data engineering team would perform the work to make a use case work if they had perfect information, which is very difficult in today's environment of fast moving data. But when you have computers in the middle of these things, like AtScale does with our analytics server, we can look at all of the workloads coming in, and we can have essentially perfect information on who's querying what and when and how, and what is the nature of the data on the back end, and all the statistics are gathered from the database, including things like latency on the connection itself, and those are factored into either doing a just-in-time rewriting of the query to make it more efficient, which definitely isn't a cache thing, but it's something that your data engineering team would recommend if they could have the ability to do that, as well as kicking off jobs to create acceleration structures that can then be used in the future. Or like this feature, this is another strategy that a data engineering team would come up with, which is, hey, this is a relatively important and yet smaller piece of data that is suitable for putting it into an in-memory database of sorts for in-memory dimensions, which for dashboard usage, for things where you have pull downs of unique dimensional values and things of that nature, you can have 20, 30 of those on a form. And even if those only take a half a second to 100 milliseconds, they can still take up a large amount of time and make the report or the dashboard or the KPI chart look like it's loading slowly. So this is really going to unlock a lot of performance benefit. And it continues to add to how the adaptive cache is morphing more into what we call autonomous data engineering now. The reason that we are in this space and we didn't just build a cache, which is a standard approach to acceleration, is we came out of the Hadoop space. First 3-4 years of the company were largely focused on Hadoop, and everything in Hadoop, although it's a database, it's a non-traditional database, how you gain performance in Hadoop is through doing your data engineering correctly. How do you exactly lay these files down on the file system, and how many parts are they? How spread across the disks are they? Do they include sorting, ordering, partitions? All these things are data engineering tasks. So we built a competency in data engineering. And the reason that we think this is super important going forward, and really the world is changing in the data space right now, is because data engineers are the hardest folks to hire in the world. And the complexity of your data infrastructure is going through the roof. You have databases that nobody's an expert in yet because they're brand new, and you have on-prem and in the cloud databases, and those all have to be merged together. So with that complexity getting larger, and the lack of data engineers, and the desire of the business to move faster with regards to data, it creates a real situation where the only way that we can see going forward is that computers have some sort of intelligent automation behind it. So that's what we've been building for the last 7 years, and I'm excited to show you what we have today, as well as 2019.3, which is going to introduce a major new enhancement in this field.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And so in addition to those high-level categories, we've got some JIRAs or improvements or bug fixes that went into this release as well. And you can see that some are around Postgres, Redshift, HDFS specifically, and then on the Snowflake side, where that HLL stats query doesn't fail. So I think these are some of the areas if there's interest in a particular JIRA or case that you have opened, please do feel free to reach out to us or throw a question in here at the end, and we can give you a status on where they may be. And this list is not comprehensive. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into this release than what we could put into some slides or we can demo today, but refer to the release notes for a more detailed or comprehensive view of everything that was addressed in and around performance in 2019.2. With respect to security, it's always important for us to stay on top of the ecosystem. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an area that you will see a lot more from AtScale in the coming quarters. And based upon where we live in the query path, there's an incredible opportunity for us to further expand the solutions we provide, contemplating things like data discovery, potentially obfuscation or enforcement, or requesting access. So as you can imagine, the BI and the AI and machine learning workflows, as they continue to evolve and look for more access to granular information, AtScale is in an incredibly good position to provide customers with more value in the space than we do today. And so this is an area, as I mentioned, you'll see further product line extension from us in the coming quarters. That said, in 29.2, we cover now Tableau's 2019.1 desktop and server support. So, being a proxy, if you will, or sitting in the query path where we do, it's critically important for us to stay on top of the ecosystem of tools that we certify and continue to support. So this was a major one for 2019.2 for AtScale, as was the JDK update. So many of you are aware, we moved away from the Oracle JDK and moved to the Open JDK for performance and security and licensing reasons. And so in 2019.2, we've got an update to the JDK that provides a number of security fixes and performance enhancements, along with an example here is the API trigger command resolves the wrong project ID. And Matt, perhaps this is another place that you can step in and talk a bit more about security as it relates to the work that we're undertaking.
Yeah. What a lot of our customers are doing, and when I talk to prospects, I hear this as well, is they've got their data infrastructure, they've got a plan internally, they're executing on those plans. They've also got this situation where it would be really helpful to share data extra enterprise. So with suppliers or with partners in some way. And what they want are features like our security dimension that lets them tie access to data to the exact user that's logged in, and perspectives for hiding certain things for certain groups or specific users. And broadly, when we think about this level of security, there's this concept called zero trust, which treats everybody that consumes the data as though they're fundamentally untrusted. So you have to validate that the machine or the device that you're accessing the data from is validated. You have to have a directory to attach to it. You have to have some level of multi-factor. There's a number of things that go into zero trust, but it creates a situation where customers can feel more comfortable building a data service that services both internal and external without having to create double copies of the data and double pipelines and double everything else, or even a multiplicative factor of that, one for each of the partners or one for each of the suppliers, which is even a worst case scenario. So these are the sorts of things that we're working on in security to make a best of breed solution.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. You want to go to the next slide, please? And we'll come to the last slide before we jump into a demo here, but this one's critically important as it relates to agility, that third critical attribute of how we think about and prioritize. And some of the biggest pieces of this release revolve around time relative. And for the longer term customers, this is something that has been out there and It's been a request for quite some time, and it's actually quite complex. And we've got Darren on the line today, who was instrumental in helping to design and draft the product requirements and work with engineering to implement those requirements into the shipping product. So thinking of things like lead and lag and periodicity and parallel periods and calendaring, in a lot of the variety of markets that we support, customers have an abundance of needs in and around time series analysis. And so this is actually what we're going to demo on the call today. And Matt's going to take us much deeper, and obviously Darren can fill in if there are questions that come along through the Q&A session. Additionally, we did cube side tuple expressions, where we can write expressions on the cube side and then push those out to all the BI tools. So there's commonality across the interfaces, which many of our features and functions with the universal semantic layer take advantage here, but we continue to extend that to include now cube side tuple expressions. And then again, there are a series of JIRAs, enhancements, bug fixes, etc., that fall under agility. But for a much more comprehensive list, I would certainly defer to the product release notes, and that will give you a much broader view of what those features and functionality are. Is there anything that you want to add here, Matt, before we go live to the demo?
I'm really excited about giving the demo, but I will say this. I think that while security will span everything, performance, I believe that the market has said that the performance problem is largely solved, or we have proof points that we're doing it. The next battleground is agility, because people, now that you proved you can do it, you want to do it more efficiently, you want to do it more effectively, and you want to get that cycle humming so that you can use analytics as a major differentiator for your business. So this is the part that I'm most excited about. And I think that this time relatives implementation speaks directly to how to make people more effective at rolling out large-scale complex analytics. Ready? Let's do a demo. For the demo, I'm going to show you three things. I'm going to show you the design center and the enhancements that we did in the application that's used to design use cases. And those are very straightforward, and I think we did a wonderful job there. I'm going to show you Excel and Tableau dashboards that Darren made. They're wonderful, and they show some of the features, and we can look at the queries and see how the complexity is reduced from the perspective of a data consumer, and how the problems are that exist with common solutions are solved. So those problems that I talked about are that when you implement time relative in the client side, it's not portable, it's not centralized, so there could be mistakes or there could be differences, and you have to do it in a language or in an expression that the end user tool supports. So not only do you have to replicate it across all the different BI tools where you might consume time relative analysis, you also have to express that in potentially different languages. You can't just cut it and paste it once you get it right. So problems that come out of that are things like you have a quarterly report and the Tableau workbooks and the Excel workbooks don't match up, and you don't know which one's right. So now you have to check the time-based financial calculations in both of those platforms, if you even notice it. If it gets through, maybe you're making decisions based on the wrong data, but you have to check it in both, and you have to reconcile the differences. You could use a database view to centralize that logic. You have to write it in SQL, and SQL is not a wonderful language for multidimensional. Just because you can do it doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. So we have support for SQL, but we also have support for a standard language, a multidimensional expression language that makes it super easy to express this logic. So, but if you use the database view, it would be in SQL, but you'd also be tied to the underlying data warehouse platform. So if you have any desire in the future to move that logic, because you're moving to the cloud, maybe you're moving to Snowflake or you're moving to BigQuery and it's strategic for your company, it'll be very difficult to do that, and you'll have to rewrite that logic to work on the new platform. That's slow and expensive, and it includes risk. So the way that we did it is you put your calculations into AtScale, and we provide both bespoke UIs as well as general purpose UIs for expressing that logic, and I'm going to show you some of that. And then the BI tools themselves, they become lightweight presentation layers without complex logic. You see the same results in all the tools, and you leverage AtScale's dialect awareness and the query optimization to abstract the business logic from the specific programming language of your data warehouse, effectively future-proofing your investment. You can also scale these things. A lot of our customers are in the situation where they say, you know what, I do time relative, but I've only really been able to do prior period or maybe half year. Well, if you're in retail, if you're in other industries where year over year is important, you can't just give that up because the actual client side tool doesn't have enough horsepower to manage it. So AtScale is a zero data movement, data warehouse focused solution. You scale that up with your IT team, you scale out that data warehouse, or you use a cloud and it scales out for you, and you get to look at as many years of data as you want. And then, of course, that autonomous data engineering piece kicks in, which improves the performance even more. So not only can you get scale, you can get performance and concurrency. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the date dimension. So this model is a internet retail model. Dates are very important in retail. So right here, and I'll zoom in so you can see this, we're looking at the product dimension and the date dimension. And you'll notice on the date dimension, there's a cute little clock right there next to the date dimension icon that indicates this is a time dimension. That's one of the only differences. When you're creating a dimension, you get a choice of standard dimension, or you can choose a time dimension. And choosing a time dimension enables other functionality in the UI around levels and how they're calculated. And we'll look at that in a sec. So let's dig into the date dimension, and let's look at this quarterly level here. So this date dimension has a lot of information on the data set itself. And this quarterly level, because this is a time dimension, has a time unit associated with it. And I can look at all of these different types of periods. These are built into the product from years, half years, trimesters, quarters, everything right down to second. So now that I've defined a time dimension and I've set the time units for my levels, I could start building calculated measures that use this multidimensional friendly expression language to make very simple expressions. And I saved a few off because I had to name them. So I'm going to grab one of these guys, and I'll find it here because I have a lot of measures. And we'll open it up a little bit and we'll look at what this is doing. So this calculated measure, pretty easy to write. There's a case statement. It's like an if then else. And then in here in the else, we're going to look at the current member, previous member. That means get me the previous period, and it's abstracted what that means. So we're going to look at some complex calendar definitions, but suffice to say, it's not always easy to say the previous member is defined by exactly, well, I mean, in months, 30 days, 31 days, whatever it is, but also across years, and in retail and in other industries, some of those calculations are even more complex. If I was going to look at this in Tableau, so let's see this easy. Here's the version if you were to write this in client code in Tableau. We went and did this to make sure that we were getting it right. There's a lot of opportunities with all these nested if then and else's, and then all the lookups that you have to do, and the bringing in all the parameters and the math that happens. It's a lot of opportunity to make mistakes on the keyboard, or what I call the bug entry device. Let's look at what happened in Tableau. So I run this query, and I'll refresh this, and we'll take a look at the query to see how easy the query is. If you wanted to write this in another tool, maybe you wanted to write we support JDBC and ODBC. We're using Tableau because it's visual, but I'll show you what the query looks like to generate this report. And if you look at this report, we're reporting by calendar year 2007, 2008. This is the previous value, 2.27 million. So I should be able to go back a quarter and get the exact same value. And there we go. It's the exact same value. This is not the most interesting or the best visualization, but the complexity of building this report allows making reports like this that are visual and are very easy to track extremely easy. So building this isn't hard in Tableau, but getting the data is very difficult. So in this case, what we're looking at is a chart of quarter to quarter growth and then the difference in it visualized. So I can see I had a record quarter right here. I had over 100%, I had 113% growth. And if I look at the two values that were used to calculate that, I see that this one is roughly a little bit over twice the volume of this, which adds up to this amount of increase. Let's take a look at what that means from a query perspective. So I refreshed that. Here's the query. And this feature that I'm showing right now, if you're not familiar with it, is life of a query. Wonderfully useful for debugging any issues that you have with queries, including how long does it take the query to get from Tableau or from the BI tool to AtScale. We've had problems like that. They've literally taken days, if not weeks, to find out that it was a sporadically bad network issue. We would have seen it instantly here because the inbound query would have taken a long time. Query planning is where AtScale does its magic. We tend to spend very little time in here, but it's important time. And then the outbound shows me how long it took to execute the query. I can open this up and look at the inbound query. I can look at the outbound query. Let's look at the inbound query. So 3 sort of easy to understand requests for data elements, and then the average of the previous period growth percentage calculated measure, and then a summarization of sales amount with a filter. Super easy to write these sorts of queries and execute them against AtScale and get some pretty powerful data back that's normally extremely hard to get. And I'm going to show the outbound query for some other more interesting queries that are even more complex. This life of a query isn't just a visualization. There's a public documented API that you can use for your own debugging purposes. You can feed it into your own visualization if you have great ideas on how to do that, or maybe you feed it into Nagios or another monitoring system to ensure that your customers are always getting good query performance. So I showed you that in Excel, and it looks like this. Or sorry, I showed you this in Tableau. What we said was the same data is going to show up in Excel. So let's go over to that one. And we get the same exact numbers. Matching those up, again, if you don't have the logic co-located with the data and centralized, there's a potential to make a mistake here. So let's keep going. Let's look at this quarterly sales year over year tab. This visualization has an interesting complication. And the complication is that your logic for year over year parallel period has to take into account a lot of complexity that's in your calendar. So this is it this is the report, a standard textual report in Excel. And if I look quarter over quarter, I get the same values here. If I look at the previous year, I will see that the numbers, they add up, they make sense from here to here. There's a year over year, 2.222 million, 2.222 million. Let me refresh this so we can look at the query. And again, we'll look at the simplicity of this query. On the inbound side, very easy. Averages, averages, averages. Very straightforward. what we did is we went and we figured out what you would have to do on the, if you did this in a client technology. And we're not going to go through everything, but modulus 4, break it down into quarters. Here's another interesting thing. Down in and around here, we have to take into account leap years. It's very easy to make a major mistake in this code. And how we did it in AtScale is very easy. It includes using a custom way to connect periods, and we're going to show that right now. Let's go over to this guy. This is a misleadingly simple visualization. Shows two sales trajectories and how they compare. So if I refresh this and I look at it in AtScale and I look at the query again, oops, over here, I have a very simple inbound query. So I'm looking at sales amount order on a retail 445 calendar. A 445 calendar in retail means that the year is broken into 4 months, 4 months, and then 5 months. And I am comparing it to this calculated measure for the previous year. And I have a filter specifically for the quarter that I'm interested in. If you were going to write that SQL, it would look something like this. I'm going to start scrolling. And I'm going to keep scrolling. And I think you get the picture. And this has acceleration, so some of this has been simplified. But this is a level of complexity to get the answer that's above most, if not all people. You'd really need a high-end data engineer to make sure that you got that done correctly. Or you would have to employ a data engineering team. This is much more likely. A data engineering team would come together and say, well, we need to restructure the data in all these different combinations. And hopefully they get that right and they've encoded the business rules translated into the technical requirements correctly to get that data proper. Now, the dirty secret in data is sometimes if you get an answer, you're happy and you don't really ask the question, did I get the right answer? So that uses a custom parallel period comparison. So in this problem, we talked about retail and manufacturing calendars, organizing time into regular intervals, 4-week month, 4-week month, 5-week month, aka 445. Sorry, I misspoke earlier when I said 4 months. I meant 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And every roughly 5 years, a year is 53 weeks instead of 52 weeks. And how do you handle that custom comparison? So in AtScale, you define a custom parallel period comparison key at the dimension level, and then use standard parallel period function. So I'll pop over to Design Center, and we'll drive into the date dimension, and we'll go down to this custom parallel period 445. Again, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 5-week months. And we'll look at the custom week level, time unit of weeks, and I scroll down, and I see that the custom parallel period comparison. So what this is doing is it's encapsulating the configuration for how to do the comparison into the definition of the level so that the function that does the comparison that's very easy to write in that calculated measure expression can be very simple. You don't have to know this. You've put this into a different part, you've abstracted it away. So based on years, and the key column is reporting week leap year key. So you know what that data, the data's in your data model, you point to it, and you've created a custom parallel period comparison. So based on that, you can do any number of key comparisons, or you can add a custom, or you can have as many keys in the compound key concept. So what I showed was that with the new time relative functionality, we allow a simplification of time-based calculations supporting previous period, lead, lag calculations, parallel period calculations, moving windows, period to date type calculations. I just showed you custom parallel period comparisons. And the interesting thing is you can combine all of those in any way that you want. You can reference calculated measures and other calculated measures. Let me show you an example of that because this is super exciting. I love this. This is my favorite visualization right here. Now what you're looking at is moving average of sales in the middle, in the blue. And then the green line is one standard deviation above the norm, and the yellow is one standard deviation below the norm. And then the blue jagged line shows you the daily sales. So what I can do with this visualization is I can look at, well, this is a great day because I'm well above the one standard deviation outside the norm. This was a bad day. And I can start to dig in and drill into that data and find out what's going on. This query, let's refresh this and take a look at this guy. This query uses elements of time relative that we implemented and composes them together. And we'll look at this. This is a pretty easy query. It's easy to understand what's going on. I'm selecting the average. And let's take a look at one of these guys because you'll see the composition. And we'll go over to here and we'll search for this guy. Let's bring him up. So we asked for the current member. We went back 29 units of measurement or periods. This was actually, I'm looking at the wrong one. I need, is it this guy? Oops, I cut and paste the wrong one, pardon me. I think it's this guy. Yeah, this is the guy here. So this calculated measure uses another calculated measure, so you can compose those together. And if we look at this one for the standard deviation, we'll see that he uses a standard function. So it goes through both calculated measures and the composition of using the different types of time relative functions together in one formula. And by doing this, this is relatively straightforward. You're able to build these very powerful visualizations. So removing that logic from the presentation tier means everybody can leverage it. You roll it out. It's very quick to get insights. It's a single source of truth, same answer in multiple tools. The calculations are much more maintainable and auditable because they're centralized. You can actually see how these calculations are being run, and your IT team can ensure that they're being made the right way. And that has the effect of lowering your switching costs if you want to eventually migrate that data to a different platform. The investment you have in your BI tools is future-proofed. You don't have to do data engineering jobs like ETL and optimizations because AtScale does them on your behalf. And this is scales with your data warehouse, and there's no data movement because of the nature of our autonomous data engineering technology. That was the feature. I'm super excited about this because this is probably, well, it's not probably. Time is the most important dimension, and it's also the most complex dimension. So I'm really happy to introduce this, and I want to thank the team for doing a bang-up job implementing this. Scott, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the demo and all the thoughtful time you and Darren put into pulling that together. So I think now we're at the time, one of the things that when we talk about autonomous data engineering, I think we focus a lot on the engineering aspect, but just thinking, as we're going through the presentation today, we often don't talk enough about the operational impacts. And so when you try to manually deal with some of these data engineering tasks, it also creates quite a level of work for the end user. right, or the operations staff to point the end users to the final data structures to use in their reports and dashboards, which ultimately can lead to incorrect business answers and the like. So I think that's an important element we probably don't discuss enough, but we have heard a lot from customers on our travels. That's an important element that they see in leveraging AtScale for those types of activities. In addition to that, I think it's, we're back to the time where we're going to jump into the Q&A. So for anybody on the line who wants to submit questions, there is that Q&A section again at the bottom of the screen. And I'll turn things over to Darren. And Darren, if you want to, I think we've probably already seen several come in, but do you want to start curating those and we'll crank away at them?
Yep. While Matt was talking, a few questions came in. And the first one is, what if I want to do a custom 6-month comparison? Does the system support that? And how can I do that in a 1-year comparison? So I think I can take that question. The answer is simply yes. Matt, if you open up the, if you go back to the level dialog and go back down to the custom, and scroll down a little bit. So there's a couple things to point out here. The first is each key column can be a compound key. Either you can point it to a single column in your database, or you can click that link that Matt's pointing on. That simply allows you to have a more sophisticated look back. But really what I wanted to point out is that big button, add custom comparison. So Matt, if you go ahead and add that and then choose a increment, you can see that you can go, you can choose any of the supported period increments that are at this level or higher. So you would choose month there, and then you'd select the column that represents the desired pointer to the previous look back of 1. So you choose a key that's like 1 month in the past. And then in your parallel period expression, if you were to choose, you just use standard logic, which is instead of specifying a look back of 1 month, you would choose 6 in your parallel period expression. So that's how you'd get your custom 6-month look back. And instead of using the rank ordering of these members in the calendar dimension, AtScale will instead do a lookup based on this key value in your database column. So the next question that came in is, what is the upgrade path to 2019.2?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Darren. So basically, the 2019.2 is a RPM upgrade from the 7.4 or the 2019.1, any of the 2019.1 releases. And for those of you unfamiliar with the current architecture and how we have it to date, what we've done is you're familiar with the old way of downloading a gzip and an installation wizard that would step you through and would place the bits on a disk in a particular location. As part of kind of our overhaul to getting to a much more scalable, clustered type of deployment, we've made the installation much more Linux system administrator friendly. And what that means is the current deployment, the way it works, is it's an RPM managed package, and it's in the op directory, which is a standard location. In addition, the standard locations is multi-version aware. So what that in effect means is it's not going to remove the old binaries. What it will do is install the new binaries and repoint to them. So it's a very lightweight upgrade process in order to get from one RPM version to the next RPM version. And then there's oftentimes questions, how do we get from a 6 all the way up to the 2019.2? And there's an intermediate step. So you upgrade to the 7.3.1 version, which is the last version that we have of the scripted and wizard style. And then there's an upgrade to the 7.4. And that 7.4 version has the new layout, and it does not it will not destroy the old version. It will copy the new version and all the information into it, and then you'll be up and running at that point in time, just to do RPM upgrade from that point forward. I'd also like to encourage everyone out there. We're absolutely helping our customers, trying to get them up to newer versions. Please reach out. We've got a lot of people who've gone through this process, and if you feel uncomfortable or you'd like some assistance and those kind of things, please reach out to us, because we'll certainly lend our assistance to you.
Thanks, Patrick. The next question is, I think, probably also best answered by you. It is, what versions of Postgres are supported and what additional data warehouse platforms are planned?
Sure. So the current version that we have in this 2019.2 release is the 9.6 version of Postgres. And for those of you familiar with Postgres, the previous versions, the 8 branch and then 9 branch are very different from one another. And then going forward, they're very, very similar. So we're supporting the 9.6 in today's release. And then going forward, we're going to support the 8.6 in this coming quarter. We also have slated for support. We're going to have HD Insights, as well as Greenplum and the Postgres 8.6 version. I'd also encourage that those on the phone, feel free to reach out if you have other databases, other RDBMSs that are of high value to you, whether it be given where we are today and that we're going to be going into virtualization. We can certainly understand that there's a high impact to the business and can very much have some profound insights by going from cross databases. So I'd encourage you to actively reach out to us and let us know what your preferences are, and we'll certainly put them and try to get them taken care of as quickly as possible. And as Matt alluded to, we're very much dedicated to continuing to expand that realm.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, we've got another question. Will the planned in-memory dimension support large degenerate dimensions?
Sure, I'll answer that one. So the answer for today is no. It doesn't support it in the 2019.2 release. However, this is a feature that's been requested specifically with the degenerate dimensions, as well as in other incarnations by a number of our customers. And so we're well aware of that. We're working towards that. We believe that we're going to have a solution, multiple solutions for that in the very near future, in the next quarter. So it is absolutely something on the top of our radar, and something that we look forward to really helping people out with, because we understand that that can be get some very significant performance gains out of it.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've got time for one more question. Are you guys planning any more products and/or services?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So great question, and the answer is yes. As many of you have seen in the product over the course of the last several years, we've continued to expand the offering in ways of things like Composer. It's probably a good example as of late, where you can do some basic data preparation for modeling inside of AtScale. And we look to continue to expand Composer in ways, as I alluded to earlier, around data discovery, enforcement, and policy. So you'll see extensions there. Matt spoke about virtualization a bit earlier, and that is a very keen area of interest for us, where we'll expand beyond the capabilities for the cube to be tied to a particular SQL instance, but whereas we can tie that virtual cube to an array of underlying DBMSs, both on-prem, in the cloud, hybrid configurations, and the like. And you'll also see us start to delve into more tabular style capabilities. So the future is very bright for AtScale. The team has grown dramatically over the last 12 months, as has our customer base. and we look to continue to provide industry-leading solutions across a wide variety of analytical use cases. So we appreciate the time. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a quarterly webinar that we'll do for each of the releases. So if you need any assistance with the 2019.2 upgrade, as Patrick mentioned, please do reach out. We do have services offerings around that and are willing to help out in a variety of ways. So if there's anything we can do to help, please reach out to Darren, Patrick, Matthew, or myself. And again, thanks for the time and appreciate all the support as AtScale customers. Have a great day.